The throne room of Velthara Prime shimmered like a vision from another world. Silver fire burned in tall crystal sconces, casting shifting light across walls that seemed carved from living stone. At the center of it all, high upon a dais, sat Queen Elyra. Her presence alone commanded silence. Long strands of silver hair spilled over her shoulders like rivers of light, framing a face both regal and sharp. Her skin glowed faintly violet beneath the crystalline torches, as though she had been shaped from starlight. The nobles who surrounded her throne bowed low, but their eyes carried hunger, not devotion. To them, Elyra was not a woman. She was a crown to be seized, a throne to be claimed. She felt their stares like blades at her back. The empire expected her to choose a husband from among them, a noble who would bind her rule and give the council the control they craved. Yet Elyra had no intention of being chained. Not tonight, not ever. The great doors of the hall opened with a deep groan, breaking the stillness. A procession entered, flanked by armored guards. At its center walked a man unlike any who had stood in this chamber before. James Hale, an ex-soldier of Earth, weary from years of battle, traded to the Empire as part of a prisoner exchange. His steps were steady, but his eyes betrayed the weight of war and exile. He was no prince, no noble. He wore no jewels, no silks. His scars were plain, and his plainness was a scar of its own in this chamber of brilliance. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some nobles laughed softly, hiding their mockery behind jeweled hands. Others leaned forward with sharp interest, as though studying an exotic beast dragged in from a distant jungle. A human, standing in the hall of Velthara Prime, was less than an insult. It was an obscenity. Elyra rose from her throne. The chamber fell still at once. Her gaze, bright as cut crystal, fixed upon the lone human. The hall stretched wide, yet it felt as though only the two of them remained. James froze under the weight of her stare, his soldier's calm shaken in a way no battlefield had managed. Then Elyra spoke. Her voice rang like steel across the chamber. "Only you can be my husband." The words struck like thunder. Gasps filled the air. Nobles leapt from their seats, their silks flaring like sparks in the firelight. Shouts echoed, disbelief and fury colliding in a storm of outrage. A queen choosing a human? It was unthinkable. It was heresy. It was war upon their traditions. James stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him that this was a trap, a game he did not understand. Yet Elyra did not waver. Her chin lifted higher, her gaze never leaving him. "Only he," she repeated, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Only he is worthy." And with those words, James Hale's life was torn from the path of survival and cast into the heart of an empire on the edge of fire. The uproar shook the grand hall like a storm. Nobles shouted over one another, their jeweled fingers stabbing the air as their voices cracked with fury. Some cried that the queen had been bewitched. Others demanded her removal for treason against tradition. No one dared speak her words back aloud, for even the echo of them seemed dangerous. James did not move. His muscles were tight, his heartbeat steady but heavy. He had faced artillery fire, had walked through burning cities, but this was different. This was not a battlefield of guns and steel. This was a battlefield of words and crowns, and he was standing at its center without even knowing the rules. Elyra raised her hand. The noise died instantly. Her voice cut through the chamber with calm authority. "This is my will. It will not be questioned." The council at the foot of her throne exchanged glances. Their faces were masks of obedience, but their eyes told a truer story. Rage. Calculation. Every one of them was already scheming how to twist this declaration to their advantage. James was escorted from the hall, not to a cell, but to a chamber within the palace. Its walls glowed faintly with embedded crystal veins, casting soft light across furniture draped in alien silks. It was beautiful, but it felt more like a cage lined in gold than a gift. He sat at the edge of the wide bed, running a hand across the scarred knuckles that had carried him through war. He could still hear her words echoing in his skull. "Husband, husband," as though such a thing could be real. The door opened. Elyra entered, without guards, without ceremony. She crossed the chamber with the quiet stride of a predator, her silver hair falling loose down her back. James rose automatically, his soldier's instinct demanding respect for any leader, even one who had just thrown his life into chaos. "You want an explanation," she said. James's jaw tightened. "Want is not the word. I need one. If this is some game of politics, then I am the peace you are sacrificing." Her violet eyes met his without flinching. "No, you are the peace that prevents me from being sacrificed." He frowned, unsure if she was mocking him, but her voice carried no jest. She stepped closer, her expression softening just enough to reveal exhaustion beneath the regal mask. "My council plots against me," she continued. "They wait for the day I choose a husband from among them, so that through marriage they can seize my throne. They believe I will yield. But if I bind myself to you, they cannot touch me. You are not theirs. You are beyond their reach. You are the one choice that makes me untouchable." James let out a slow breath. "Untouchable? You have made me a target instead. Every noble in that hall wants me dead now." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something colder. "They wanted you dead the moment you set foot in this palace. Now at least you stand beside me instead of alone." He studied her face. He saw no hesitation, no regret. She had chosen him not for love, not for friendship, but for survival. A soldier's purpose. A shield. He knew that role too well. "If I agree," he said, "I am a pawn in your war. If I refuse, I am a corpse before the sun rises. That is no choice at all." Elyra's eyes softened, just slightly, enough for him to see the woman behind the queen. "Then let us trap them together. Play their game, James Hale. Not as my pawn, but as my weapon." Her words should have stung, but they did not. They carried a fire that stirred something inside him, something he had thought the war had burned away. He was tired, broken, and scarred, but still he knew how to fight. "I will stand with you," he said at last. "But do not mistake me for one of your nobles. I am no ornament to be polished. If I fight for you, I fight as myself." For the first time, her lips curved into a true smile. It was faint, fragile, but real. "Good," she whispered, "because I do not need an ornament. I need someone who will not break." When dawn came, the announcement spread across Velthara Prime like wildfire. The queen had chosen a human consort. The empire raged. Whispers filled the streets, filled the markets, filled the towering spires of crystal. Some nobles hid their fury behind silken masks. Others swore vengeance aloud. And in the palace, James Hale learned what it meant to be the most hated man in an empire built on pride. The palace of Velthara Prime was a maze of beauty and danger. Corridors glowed with veins of light that pulsed faintly, as though the very walls were alive. Gardens stretched beneath glass domes, filled with flowers that shimmered like flames and trees that whispered in alien tongues when the wind passed through their leaves. To James, it was a place of wonder. But beneath that wonder lurked shadows. The first attempt came on his third night. A crystal goblet had been left in his chamber, filled with deep red wine. Its surface gleamed as though tempting him to drink. He had been a soldier too long to trust such kindness. When he tipped the liquid onto the floor, the stone hissed and smoked where it landed. Poison. Silent, efficient, and meant to kill without trace. The second attempt came in the gardens. Elyra had invited him to walk among the glowing trees, perhaps to show him that she was not always queen, not always bound to her throne. She spoke of her childhood, of how she used to sneak into the gardens at night to watch the flowers bloom under starlight. For a moment, she seemed less like a ruler and more like a woman who had been denied the freedom to laugh. That moment ended when the shadows moved. Figures slipped from behind the trees, their blades catching the glow of the flowers. James reacted before thought, his soldier's instincts taking command. He shoved Elyra behind him and drew the short ceremonial blade he had been given as a token of status. The fight was swift and brutal. Steel clashed against crystal blades, sparks leaping as the attackers pressed hard. James fought with the rhythm of survival, each strike a reminder that he had lived through worse and would live through this too. When the last of the assassins fell, the garden lay silent once more. Elyra stared at him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something deeper. He had shielded her with no hesitation. Not as a pawn, not as a political piece, but as a man who saw her life as worth more than his own. "You could have fled," she said softly. "I am not built for running," James replied. His voice was steady, but inside, the adrenaline thundered through him like a storm. Something changed between them that night. In the quiet after danger, when the torches flickered low and the perfume of alien blossoms hung in the air, Elyra laughed. It was small, sudden, and almost broken, but it was real. James had never heard anything so disarming. For years she had hidden behind masks of steel and silver, but here, in the aftermath of blood, she allowed herself a moment of humanity. From then on, their bond began to shift. She would seek him out between councils, walking with him in corridors where the noble's whispers could not reach. He listened when she spoke of her burdens, of the endless weight of ruling a people who did not love her, only the crown she carried. He told her pieces of his past, the battles that had carved scars into his body and mind. She listened without judgment, and for the first time, he felt that someone saw him not as a weapon, but as a man. Yet the shadows only grew darker. The council tightened its grip, their plots sharpening like daggers. A servant loyal to James was found dead, his throat cut in the kitchens. Letters warning him to leave were slipped beneath his door, written in trembling hands that suggested both fear and defiance. Every step he took, every breath he drew, felt watched. One evening, as he stood at the balcony overlooking the city's glowing spires, Elyra joined him. The wind carried her hair like silver fire, and for a long moment they said nothing. Then she whispered, "They will not stop until one of us is gone." James turned his gaze toward her. "Then we do not give them what they want." She looked at him with eyes that held both defiance and weariness. "Do you not regret standing beside me, James Hale? This is not your war. You owe me nothing." He thought of the poison, of the assassins in the garden, of the loneliness he had seen in her when the mask slipped, and he shook his head. "Maybe not, but I cannot watch someone fight alone when I have the strength to stand with them." Her hand brushed his, tentative at first, then steady. The contact was simple, almost accidental, yet it carried the weight of every word they could not speak. For a queen who had only ever been touched as a symbol, and a soldier who had only ever been touched by war, it was something more than comfort. It was a promise. Still, the palace walls whispered with betrayal. Elyra's advisors grew bolder in their defiance. James knew the next strike would not be from the shadows. It would be in the open before the throne itself. And when it came, neither of them would walk away unchanged. The royal feast was meant to be a show of unity. Long tables of crystal stretched through the hall, laden with glowing fruits, meats carved from beasts that shimmered like molten glass, and wines that caught the light in swirling patterns. Nobles filled the chamber, their silks and jewels blazing like stars in a storm. Yet beneath the glamour, James felt the tension. Every smile was sharp. Every toast carried venom hidden behind silver cups. He sat at Elyra's side, dressed in ceremonial robes the queen had commanded for him. The fabric clung awkwardly to his shoulders, heavy with embroidery, but it marked him as her consort. Every eye burned into him, some with disgust, some with hatred, a few with fear. The moment came when a servant placed a goblet before him, its liquid shimmering a little too brightly. James did not drink. Instead, he pushed it toward the noble seated across from him, a man named Lord Velthara, whose gaze had been too sharp all evening. "Share with me," James said calmly. Velthara sneered but lifted the cup. The instant the liquid touched his lips, he collapsed, choking as his skin flushed black. Screams erupted. Nobles leapt to their feet. Guards rushed forward. James's hand was already on the hilt of his blade, his instincts honed by war. But the attempt was not only against him. In the chaos, a second assassin struck. A figure disguised as a servant lunged from the side with a dagger aimed for Elyra's heart. James moved without thought. He slammed his arm into the attacker, twisting the blade away, then drove his fist hard into the assassin's chest. The man crumpled, the dagger clattering to the floor just shy of the queen's throne. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted accusations. Some demanded James be executed for violence in the queen's presence. Others called for Elyra to dismiss him as an unfit consort. Yet Elyra rose, her voice cutting through the noise. Enough! Her tone was steel, her eyes blazing. He saved my life. Again. While you squabble like children, he bleeds for me. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. James felt the weight of her words settle upon him. It was no longer just survival. It was loyalty. It was becoming something far deeper. Later, when the hall was cleared and the dead carried away, Elyra stood with James in the quiet of her private chamber. Her mask of command was gone, and for the first time he saw the tremble in her hands. I feel like a prisoner on my own throne, she whispered. Every day I wake, I wonder if it will be my last. My council watches me like wolves, and now they bare their teeth in the open. James stepped closer. Then let them see you have someone who will fight beside you. Not as a pawn. Not as a symbol. As a man who sees you for who you are. Not what you wear on your head. Her eyes glistened, and she turned her face away, as though afraid to let him see her weakness. But he reached out gently and lifted her chin. Elyra, he said softly, you are more than a crown. Do not forget that. For a heartbeat, silence held them both. Then, as though drawn by a force neither could resist, she leaned closer. Their lips met in a kiss that was not born of duty or politics, but of something fragile and undeniable. It was brief, trembling with the fear of what it meant, but it carried more weight than any oath spoken in the council chamber. When they parted, Elyra's eyes searched his face. This is dangerous, she murmured. Everything we do here is dangerous, James replied. But this is the first thing that feels real. Their fragile peace did not last. The council moved swiftly, emboldened by failure turned to fury. Within days, whispers spread through the palace. Declarations of treason. Plans whispered in corridors. Guards shifting their allegiance. The air grew heavy, the halls too quiet, as if the palace itself was holding its breath. Then, one night, the blow fell. The council announced Elyra unfit to rule. The doors of the throne room burst open as soldiers stormed in, their banners marked not with the queen's sigil, but with the crest of rebellion. Nobles cheered as blades were drawn. Elyra, cornered in her own chamber of power, stood tall. James drew his blade and placed himself at her side. He had fought wars for nations that had forgotten him. But this time he knew why he fought. The coup had begun, and neither of them could turn back. The throne room burned with chaos. Shouts echoed from the high crystal arches as armored guards clashed, steel against steel, the sound ringing like thunder. The rebels poured in with brutal precision, their blades flashing, their banners declaring a new order. At their head strode Lord Velthar's brother, High Counselor Draven, his face carved into a mask of cold fury. He raised his staff, its jeweled head gleaming with authority. Elyra of Velthara, he bellowed. You are unfit to rule. By the voice of the council you are dethroned. Kneel or die. Elyra did not move. Her violet skin shimmered in the glow of the torches, her silver hair cascading like fire. You think I will bend? She said, her voice ringing clear. You forget whose throne this is. You forget whose blood forged it. Draven sneered. A queen who shares her bed with a human has no right to rule. The words cut through the chamber, meant to humiliate, but James stepped forward, blade drawn. His eyes locked with Draven's. Say what you want about me, he growled. But I won't let you touch her. And then the fighting surged like a wave. James moved like a man possessed, every instinct from years on the battlefield guiding him. He blocked a strike meant for Elyra, spun, and drove his blade into the chest of a traitor guard. Blood sprayed across the marble floor. Elyra seized a fallen spear and fought at his side, her movements elegant but deadly, every strike proof she was no fragile monarch. The throne room became a storm of violence. Loyalists clashed with traitors, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and blood. James's body screamed with exhaustion, but he did not falter. He could not. Each time Elyra wavered, he was there, shielding her, steadying her, reminding her she was not alone. Fall back, Draven shouted to his men, rallying them for another charge. Kill the human, leave the queen alive. We'll parade her broken before the Empire. They surged again, and this time James nearly fell. A blade slashed across his side, hot pain tearing through him. He staggered, breath ragged. But Elyra caught him, her grip fierce. "You will not take him from me," she cried, her voice breaking through the roar of battle. For the first time, her fury was not only for her throne. It was for him. Summoning every ounce of strength, James pushed forward. Together they fought back to back, cutting through wave after wave until the marble floor was slick with blood. Finally, James locked blades with Draven himself. The counselor sneered. "You think love will save you? You are nothing but her weakness." James snarled, forcing the blade aside. "No, I'm her strength." With a final, brutal strike, he drove his sword through Draven's chest. The traitor gasped, eyes wide, before collapsing at James's feet. The room fell still. The remaining rebels, seeing their leader slain, dropped their weapons one by one. Silence spread like a tide. The battle was over. Elyra stood, chest heaving, her gown torn, her crown askew. She turned to James, blood streaked across his face, his body trembling from wounds. In that quiet, broken moment, he asked her the question that had haunted him since the day she named him. "Why me? Why choose me, when you could have anyone?" Her eyes softened, silver lashes damp with tears. She stepped close, pressing her hand against his cheek. "Because you were the only one who looked at me and saw a woman, not a throne, not a prize. You saw me, and I chose you." Gasps echoed through the hall as the remaining nobles watched their queen stand, hand in hand with a human, unbowed and unbroken. The coup had failed, but something greater had been won. Elyra's freedom to love, and James's place not as her shield, but as her equal. The days after the coup were heavy with silence. The blood had been washed from the marble floors, but the scars of betrayal lingered in every shadowed corridor. Nobles walked with lowered eyes, fearful now of the queen whose strength had been proven in fire and steel. James was given chambers near Elyra's, his wounds tended by alien healers whose hands glowed with pale light. But even as his body knit itself back together, his mind replayed the throne room, her hand on his cheek, her voice trembling as she admitted why she had chosen him. At dawn, a summons came. The great bell of Velthara Prime tolled, its deep voice carrying across the floating palaces and crystal towers. Citizens gathered in the plaza below the palace, a sea of faces shimmering under the alien sun. When Elyra stepped onto the balcony, robed in white and silver, the crowd gasped. Her crown glinted with a brilliance that seemed brighter than before, but it was not the crown that held their eyes. It was the man standing at her side. James wore ceremonial armor crafted for him by her artisans, steel etched with alien runes. His posture was straight, but his gaze was steady not on the crowd, but on Elyra. The high priestess lifted her staff, her voice echoing like thunder. "By the will of the stars, we witness a union that defies tradition, yet binds stronger than law. Queen Elyra of Velthara, do you stand with this man, not as ruler and subject, but as woman and husband?" Elyra turned, violet eyes soft, her silver hair catching the light. "I do." The priestess looked to James. "James Hale of Earth, do you vow to stand with this queen, not as soldier and shield alone, but as partner, heart to heart?" James's voice was quiet, but it carried across the plaza. "I do. Always." A hush fell. The priestess raised her staff high, then struck it once against the marble. "Then before empire, before stars, you are bound. A throne of two hearts, a reign of one soul." The crowd erupted. Some shouted in outrage, others in awe. Nobles whispered in disbelief, while common citizens cried with hope. The image of their queen, hand entwined with a human's, burned into their minds as a sign that perhaps change was possible. Elyra leaned close, her voice meant only for James. This was never meant to be politics. This was meant to be us. He smiled faintly, gripping her hand tighter. Then let them watch. Let them see what real strength looks like. Later, within the grand hall, the coronation feast was held. Music swelled, alien instruments weaving haunting melodies. For the first time in centuries, joy replaced fear in the palace walls. Elyra and James sat side by side upon the twin thrones, no longer queen and consort alone, but partners. James looked out across the hall, once filled with scorn, now filled with uneasy respect. He thought of the soldier he had been, the wanderer with no home. And then he looked at Elyra, her smile breaking through the weight of duty, and he knew. He had found his place. The night ended with their crowns lifted high, the Empire's seal blazing above them, and a vow spoken not only to each other, but to every soul who watched, that the future of Velthara would not be forged by fear, but by hope. And at the heart of it all stood a queen who dared to love, and a man who dared to stand with her. The outsider had become her husband. The Empire had been shocked into silence. And for the first time in living memory, the galaxy believed in something greater than power. It believed in love.